They laughed behind her back, whispering cruel jokes about her wrinkled skin and how she could barely hear them anymore. To them, she was just an old, fragile woman, someone they thought had nothing left to offer. But what they didn't know was that every word, every smirk, and every insult was silently recorded in her heart. Years later, when she passed away, they gathered, expecting to inherit everything she had worked for. But as the lawyer unfolded her will, their smiles froze, and the room went completely silent. What she had written inside was more powerful than anything they could have imagined, and it changed their lives forever. You won't believe what her final words revealed. It was a warm afternoon in late spring when Margaret Harper sat quietly in her worn armchair by the window. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned the pages of a book she couldn't quite hear herself reading aloud. At 78, Margaret had lived a life filled with love, sacrifice, and an unshakable commitment to her family. But recently, the laughter she heard from the other rooms of her own home wasn't the warm kind. It was sharp, cruel, and aimed at her. Her 3 children, Tom, Olivia, and James, had begun to view her as nothing more than an old, fragile woman whose hearing had failed her. They whispered about her in the kitchen, sometimes not even bothering to lower their voices, assuming she wouldn't catch their words. The truth was, Margaret could read lips better than they realized. She had adapted to her gradual hearing loss over the years, but she never told them just how much she could still understand. She listened without them knowing to their snide remarks, the way they rolled their eyes when she asked them to repeat themselves, and the way they mimicked her when they thought she wasn't looking. At first, it hurt. Then it began to shape something inside her, a decision she had never thought she'd have to make. Margaret's life had not been an easy one. She'd been widowed young, raising the 3 children on her own after her husband, Daniel, passed away from a sudden illness when the kids were still in school. She worked 2 jobs, one at the local bakery in the mornings and another cleaning offices at night, just to make sure they had food on the table, clothes to wear, and a safe home to grow up in. She skipped vacations, wore the same coat for over a decade, and never once complained about the sacrifices she made for them. Her dream was simple, to see them succeed and to give them a better life than she had known. But somewhere along the way, her children seemed to forget. They became adults with busy lives, careers, and families of their own, but their visits were rare and often filled with impatience. Her hearing loss became an excuse for them to exclude her from conversations. They laughed when she misheard something and repeated it wrong. They called her out of touch and slow, as if she wasn't in the room. And the worst part was that the kindness she had spent her life giving seemed to be met with entitlement rather than gratitude. One particular evening stood out in Margaret's mind. It was her birthday, and her children had gathered at her house. They brought a cake, and for a moment she thought perhaps they were there to truly celebrate her. But when she asked Olivia to repeat something she had said, Olivia turned to James and Tom and exaggeratedly mouthed the words, mocking her mother's attempts to understand. The 3 of them burst into laughter, while Margaret pretended to smile, so they wouldn't know how much it hurt. Later that night, she cried quietly in her room, realizing that the people she loved most in the world no longer saw her as someone worthy of respect. Margaret began to think about her will, a document she had drafted years ago, leaving her home, savings, and family heirlooms equally to her 3 children. But now she wondered if that was the right choice. She thought about the way they treated her and whether they truly deserved what she had worked so hard for. Over the next few months, she started making changes, visiting her lawyer in secret. She didn't tell anyone what she was doing, but she knew exactly why she was doing it. Margaret had one person in her life who still treated her with warmth and kindness: her neighbor, Sarah, a young single mother who lived next door. Sarah often came by to check on her, bringing fresh bread or helping her carry groceries. Sarah's little boy, Ethan, would sit with Margaret and listen to her stories, never once mocking her when she misheard something. To them, She wasn't an old deaf woman, she was simply Miss Margaret, the gentle neighbor who always had cookies in a jar and time to listen. The more Margaret thought about it, the more she realized that love and respect mattered far more than blood. She decided that her will would reflect that truth. When she was done, her estate would no longer go to her children equally. Instead, the majority of her assets, including the house, would go to Sarah and Ethan. Her children would still receive something, but it would be a fraction of what they had expected. Margaret's lawyer advised her to write a personal letter to accompany the will, explaining her decision. She poured her heart into that letter, recalling her sacrifices, expressing her disappointment, and reminding them of the value of kindness. Months later, Margaret passed away quietly in her sleep. Her funeral was modest, but filled with neighbors and friends who spoke about her generosity. Her children attended, dressed in black, but their minds were already wandering to the reading of the will. They assumed they would be inheriting a small fortune. After all, their mother had owned her home outright and had a lifetime of savings. The day of the will reading arrived. The three siblings sat side by side in the lawyer's office, their expressions somewhere between sadness and expectation. Sarah sat in the back, holding Ethan's hand, unsure why she had even been asked to attend. The lawyer began by reading Margaret's letter. Her voice was calm, but steady as she spoke Margaret's words aloud. "My dear children, if you are hearing this, it means I am no longer with you. I hope you remember me, not only as your mother, but as someone who loved you fiercely and gave all she could so you could have a better life. I worked hard, often at the expense of my own dreams, to give you opportunities I never had. I never asked for repayment, only respect and kindness in return. In recent years, I have felt a distance growing between us, a distance not caused by my age or my hearing loss, but by a lack of compassion. I have heard the laughter, the whispers, and the words you thought I couldn't understand. I may have been hard of hearing, but I was not blind to your behavior. Love is shown through actions, and in the end, I have chosen to leave the bulk of my estate to someone who treated me with kindness when I needed it most. Sarah, you and Ethan brought light into my life when others brought shadows. My home will now be yours, so that you and your son will always have a place to feel safe. My savings will help ensure Ethan has the opportunities I once wished for my own children. To my children, I leave a small sum as a token of the love I will always have for you, though my heart wishes things had been different." By the time the letter was finished, the room was silent. Tom shifted uncomfortably, Olivia's eyes welled with tears, and James stared at the floor. Sarah sat frozen, tears streaming down her face, realizing the gift Margaret had given her. The children couldn't bring themselves to speak. In that moment, they understood the weight of their actions, the jokes, the mocking, the neglect. The inheritance they thought they deserved had gone to someone who had earned it through kindness and respect.